When I first bought the house, I thought I'd found paradise. A peaceful suburban street, wide sidewalks, big yards, kids riding bikes, and neighbors waving as they mowed their lawns. Everything felt like a scene out of a feel-good family movie, until I met Karen. I didn't even know her name at first. I just knew there was this woman, late 50s, bleach blonde hair that was almost radioactive, and an expression that made you feel guilty even if you hadn't done anything wrong. She had that sharp squint, the kind of look someone gives when they think they own the entire block, not just their house. She was always outside, peering through her blinds or standing on her porch with arms crossed like a warden, keeping track of every move you made. The first time we met, she didn't introduce herself or say welcome to the neighborhood. No, she marched straight across the lawn and said, "Your trash cans are 6 inches over the property line. We have rules here, and I expect you to follow them." That was my hello to Karen. No handshake, no smile, just rules, rules, rules. I figured she was just one of those overly involved types. Annoying, but harmless. I had no idea at the time that this woman was about to declare war, and my poor mailbox would be the first casualty. It started small, almost petty. I had just installed a brand new mailbox, a nice sturdy one with a decorative post. Nothing fancy, but it looked clean, matched the house, and stood proudly at the edge of my property like a good mailbox should. But for some reason, this absolutely infuriated Karen. The first time, I thought it was a fluke. I came outside one morning and found the mailbox door dangling open, bent sideways like someone had yanked it too hard. A minor annoyance, but I shrugged it off. Maybe a kid passing by was bored and gave it a tug. Whatever. I hammered it back into place and moved on. The second time, it wasn't so subtle. I woke up to find the whole mailbox leaning forward at a 45-degree angle, the post partially uprooted from the ground. That's when my gut told me this wasn't random vandalism. This felt personal. My mind immediately went to Karen, the way she scowled the mailbox whenever she walked by, the way she muttered about neighborhood standards like some suburban vigilante. Still, I had no proof, so I fixed it again and kept quiet. Then came the third strike, and this time there was no denying it. I stepped out to get the mail and found my entire mailbox snapped clean off the post, lying face down in the grass like a fallen soldier. Someone hadn't just bumped it with their car or knocked into it accidentally. They had gone to town on it. Scratches, dents, even boot prints in the dirt nearby. This wasn't vandalism anymore. This was a message. And who else would care this much about a mailbox? Who else had a personal grudge against me and an unhealthy obsession with neighborhood aesthetics? All signs pointed directly across the street to Karen's perfectly manicured lawn and her hawk-like glare from behind the curtains. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a mailbox. This was about control. Karen wanted me to know I was living under her thumb, her rules, her judgment. She thought she could break me one mailbox at a time, but what she didn't know was she just picked a fight with someone who had absolutely zero intention of backing down. After the third mailbox attack, I knew I couldn't just sit back and keep replacing it like some passive punching bag. This was turning into a full-blown turf war, and if Karen wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready to get creative. But before I could even launch my counterattack, Karen cranked the crazy up a notch. The very next morning, I caught her red-handed. I had just poured myself a coffee when I saw movement through my front window. There she was, Karen, in broad daylight, marching across the street with a hammer in her hand like some kind of deranged home improvement vigilante. She stomped right up to my freshly repaired mailbox and started wailing on it like it owed her money. Whack, whack, metal bent, paint chipped. And just for good measure, she kicked it when she was done, sending it tumbling into my lawn. I swung open the door and yelled, "Are you out of your mind?" But Karen just flipped her hair, gave me a smug smile, and said, "It's an eyesore. I'm saving the neighborhood from your trashy taste." Then she strutted back to her house like she'd just done a public service announcement. That's when something inside me snapped. This wasn't about HOA rules, neighborhood aesthetics, or some petty spat anymore. This was personal. Karen wanted a war. Fine. But she was about to learn that I fight to win, and I fight dirty. That afternoon, I didn't just replace the mailbox. I upgraded it. I drove to a salvage yard and bought a thick steel post, the kind they use to support highway signs, heavy, reinforced, and practically indestructible. I set it in concrete, 3 feet deep, so there was no way she could knock it over. Then for the mailbox itself, I had a custom steel box welded, thick enough to survive a nuclear apocalypse. I even gave it a nice coat of paint to make it look harmless, but under that paint was pure industrial-grade vengeance. But I wasn't done. Inside the mailbox, I installed a motion sensor camera, pointed straight at the street. If Karen so much as breathed near my new steel beast, I'd have her on tape in 4K glory. The stage was set. Now all I had to do was wait. And knowing Karen, I wouldn't have to wait long. It didn't even take 24 hours. The next morning, I was sipping my coffee again, same window, same view. But this time, I was excited. I knew Karen couldn't resist. It was like dangling a steak in front of a starving wolf. And sure enough, at exactly 7:12 a.m., Karen marched out her front door, still in her tacky leopard print robe, wielding her hammer like some self-appointed suburban sheriff. She stomped across the street, eyes locked on my new mailbox, like it personally insulted her ancestors. I could already hear her muttering about property values and unsightly garbage. But what Karen didn't know, what no one knew, was that this wasn't just a mailbox. This was a trap. She raised her hammer and swung full force, expecting thin aluminum or cheap plastic like before. But instead, the hammer bounced back like she'd hit a tank. The shock traveled right up her arm, and she screamed so loud I heard it through my window. She stumbled back, shaking her wrist, completely stunned. But Karen is nothing if not stubborn. So she tried again, harder. This time the hammer didn't just bounce off, it snapped in half. Half the handle broke clean off, and the head clattered onto my driveway. The look on her face? Pure confusion, blended with panic and rage. I opened the door, arms crossed, and said, "Problem, Karen?" She was speechless for a second, then screamed, "You can't have a fortress mailbox. That's illegal." I calmly told her, "It's up to code. Reinforced for safety. Your little vandalism hobby? Not so much." Then for the cherry on top, I told her about the hidden motion camera, meaning her little tantrum was now officially evidence. She stormed back across the street, but I could already see it in her face. I had just become her personal obsession. This wasn't over for her. Not even close. And for me, I was just getting warmed up. By noon, my phone was already buzzing. The HOA president, a guy named Doug, who always looked slightly terrified of Karen, was calling me. I already knew what this was about, so I let him leave a voicemail first. I wanted to hear exactly how Karen spun her story. Sure enough, the voicemail started with, "Hi, this is Doug from the HOA. We received a complaint from your neighbor regarding a fortified mailbox." You could hear the confusion dripping from his voice, like even he couldn't believe this was an actual issue. A few minutes later, Karen herself marched up to my door, a guidelines printout in hand, face already red with righteous fury. She didn't even give me a chance to say hello before launching into her speech. "This," she hissed, waving the printout, "is a clear violation of aesthetic standards. Your mailbox is an eyesore and an illegal hazard. You're going to remove it immediately or face fines." I didn't even flinch. I just smiled and said, "Karen, do you even know what you're admitting right now?" She blinked. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the security footage from that morning. Every swing of her hammer, every cuss word, every second of her committing vandalism on my property. "See," I said, "the mailbox isn't a hazard, you are. You destroyed my old one. This new one, perfectly legal. Reinforced for safety per county code. But you're on camera committing a crime." Her face turned the shade of a boiled lobster. She snatched the printout back and tried a new angle. "The HOA will vote to remove it. I have friends on the board." "Oh," I said with the sweetest smile. "You mean Doug?" "I already sent him the footage, too. We're having a meeting about it next week, and you're invited." Karen had walked right into her own trap, and I could see the moment she realized it. She stormed off again, but this time I knew she wasn't just angry. She was scared, because this wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. This was about her losing control, and Karen couldn't survive without control. The following week, the HO gathered in the small clubhouse at the end of the street. Usually, these meetings were a snooze fest, people arguing over lawn heights, barking dogs, and whose teenager drove too fast down a cul-de-sac. But this time, every single seat was filled. Word had gotten out that Karen was about to get exposed, and no one wanted to miss the show. I walked in with a USB drive in my hand, holding the security footage that showed Karen smashing my old mailbox. I could see her sitting at the end of the table, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was trying to fold herself in half. Doug, the HOA president, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but he cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. First item on the agenda, Doug said nervously, is a complaint filed by Mrs. Reynolds, Karen, about the reinforced mailbox installed by Mr. Parker. Karen's hand shot up immediately. That thing is a weapon, not a mailbox. It's dangerous, it's ugly, and it's against community standards. I stood up calm as could be and held up the USB drive. Before we discuss my mailbox, I think the board should see exactly why I had to install it. Doug's face went pale. Oh, okay. We hooked the drive to the projector, and suddenly the whole room was watching Karen, in glorious high definition, attacking my old mailbox like it owed her money. Every swing of the hammer, every muttered curse word, and the dramatic way she stomped off afterward played for the entire neighborhood to see. The room was dead silent, until someone, I think it was Mrs. Gonzalez from 2 doors down, snorted with laughter. Then the dam broke. People started laughing, whispering, even clapping. One guy in the back shouted, "Damn, Karen, you got a mean swing." Karen's face turned so red I thought she might spontaneously combust. Doug stammered, well, this is highly irregular. Actually, I said, it's directly relevant. Karen destroyed my legally installed mailbox. I replaced it with one that complies with county regulations, fully within my rights. The only violation here is hers. The laughter died down, but the mood had completely shifted. People were sick of Karen's nonsense, and this was the perfect excuse to finally hold her accountable. Karen tried to argue. Of course, she blamed stress, her blood sugar, and even claimed I had provoked her by growing ugly flowers near the sidewalk. But nobody was buying it. By the end of the meeting, the HOA officially dropped her complaint, issued her a formal warning for vandalism, and even suggested she seek anger management classes. As I left the meeting, several neighbors patted me on the back. One whispered, "It's about time someone put her in her place." Karen had spent years ruling the neighborhood through intimidation, but now the curtain was pulled back and everyone saw the real her. If you thought Karen was the type to take a public shaming and learn her lesson, you'd be wrong. After that HOA meeting, she vanished for a few days, which was weird for someone who lived to patrol the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff. But I knew deep down she was cooking up something. And sure enough, my gut was right. One morning, I came outside to find a handwritten note taped to my brand new steel mailbox. It was scrawled in red marker, all caps, pure unhinged energy. You think you've won? This isn't over. Your ugly wall of metal will come down. HOA rules say so. Karen. At first, I laughed. The steel wall mailbox was built directly within my property line, using legal specs I had double-checked with the county. Karen had no leg to stand on, but the fact she was still obsessed with getting even told me she was losing her grip. What happened next? It was so insane. I almost couldn't believe it myself. That night, my security cameras caught her sneaking into my yard at 2 a.m., armed with a can of spray paint and a crowbar. Her plan was questionable at best. She first tried to pry the mailbox off its concrete foundation, which was laughable considering it was literally bolted into reinforced concrete. When that failed, she spray-painted the words "illegal structure" across the front, as if graffiti was legally binding. She must have felt victorious, because she stood there, hands on her hips, admiring her work. What she didn't realize was, I'd already filed a temporary restraining order against her right after the HOA meeting. That means her little nighttime visit? Automatic violation. The next morning, I didn't even clean the paint off. I left it there on full display when the sheriff's deputy, who happens to be my cousin, drove up Karen's driveway with legal papers in hand. Karen screeched like a rusty door hinge when she realized this wasn't just a warning. It was a formal charge of trespassing, vandalism, and violation of a restraining order. And here's the twist. Because she was officially warned at the HOA meeting, and because this was caught on camera, her stunt wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It triggered mandatory legal action under local nuisance laws. In other words, she was officially screwed. But I wasn't done. With my lawyer's help, I filed a countersuit, demanding she pay for damages, court costs, and even the security upgrades I had to install because of her harassment. Karen, for all her barking, suddenly went very quiet. Turns out, fighting a legal battle costs actual money, and for all her bluster about community standards, her own house was behind on taxes and violated several HOA rules herself. The steel wall mailbox became a neighborhood legend, not because it was just a mailbox, but because it stood as a symbol of finally standing up to the neighborhood bully. With Karen's legal troubles piling up, you think she might finally take a step back and reevaluate her life choices. But nope, this was Karen. When faced with consequences, she didn't retreat. She doubled down. After her late-night vandalism escapade landed her with trespassing charges and a public shaming at the HOA meeting, she went door to door, spinning a wild story about how I was a dangerous threat to the community and my steel wall mailbox was some kind of booby trap designed to hurt innocent neighbors. She even claimed, and I swear I'm not making this up, that my mailbox was radioactive because of its metal content. The only problem? Nobody believed her anymore. See, after years of mailbox smashing, fake citations, noise complaints, and her infamous yelling fits, my neighbors had reached their limit. Most of them were sick of Karen long before my feud even started, but they were too afraid to confront her. But after seeing her caught red-handed on my security footage, spray painting my property like a lunatic, the entire neighborhood finally saw Karen for what she was, a walking disaster with a superiority complex. Neighbors I had barely spoken to before started stopping by, not just to check out my new mailbox fortress, but to share their own horror stories about Karen. One family told me how she tried to get their kids' lemonade stand shut down for unapproved commerce. Another said she reported their Christmas lights for being too bright. One guy said she called the cops because his truck was parked facing the wrong direction. And the best part? Karen's little stunt backfired spectacularly. See, by vandalizing my mailbox and getting herself charged, she had violated several of her own HOA's rules, including property defacement, criminal conduct within the community, harassment of a fellow homeowner. All of these triggered an automatic HOA disciplinary hearing, and this time the board wasn't on her side. When Karen showed up to that meeting, arms crossed, scowl on her face, hissing at anyone who dared to make eye contact, it was like watching a villain realize their army had deserted them. Nobody defended her. Nobody cared about her excuses. In fact, several neighbors stood up to personally request a removal from the HOA board. Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the block, was suddenly a pariah in her own kingdom. And as they read out the formal complaints, listing her vandalism, harassment, and misuse of HOA authority, I could see it in her eyes, the cold, brutal realization that her reign was over. But the final blow, that came next, and it was glorious. After that HOA meeting, you'd think Karen would retreat quietly, lick her wounds, and disappear into suburban obscurity. But no, Karen wasn't just a bad neighbor, she was a legend in her own mind, and legends don't quit. Just days after her public humiliation, Karen pulled off one final spectacle, a desperate attempt to reclaim her power. She sent out a newsletter, printed on bright pink paper, stuffed into everyone's mailbox, claiming she had been unjustly persecuted by a conspiracy of lawless homeowners led by me, the mailbox tyrant. She called herself the defender of community values and said her removal from the HOA board was illegal. She even staged a protest in her own front yard, holding up a sign that said, "Save our streets, and no to steal mailbox terror." The problem? Nobody showed up. Not one single neighbor stood with her. Kids walked past her holding in their laughter, and the local mailman took a selfie with my steel wall mailbox captioned, "Certified Karen-proof." But I wasn't done. No, I had one final card to play. See, after Karen's vandalism spree, my lawyer dug deeper into her past HOA rulings, and we found a little gold nugget. Years ago, Karen had installed an illegal fence extension that violated county setback rules. The only reason it was never challenged. Karen was the one in charge of approving fence permits. She approved her own illegal fence and threatened fines on anyone who questioned it. So guess what I did? I reported it directly to the county inspector. Within a week, Karen was slapped with a demolition order, forcing her to tear down her precious fence at her own expense. It cost her thousands, and because she was officially off the HOA board, she had no power to stop it. The final scene, Karen standing in her front yard, watching a crew rip down her illegal fence, while my steel wall mailbox stood proudly across the street, untouched, gleaming in the sun, the ultimate symbol of her downfall.